Think about the last time you went to a live improv performance. You probably remember lots of skinny jeans and matching Converse, lots of banter with the audience, exuberant performance of the I don't know what to do with my hands dance, and a general feeling of maybe, more than likely, wanting it to be over. Sorry, that's probably me being cynical since I was not cast on my college improv team for a second season, a fate that probably worked out in my favor, but improv is an interesting topic because it means so many things. Improvisation is part of daily life. We're constantly making shit up on the spot. Life gets no rehearsal. To perform the task of living life, you are improvising, yet when we watch improv on stage, it looks so unnatural. If it's performed well, the actors make it look easy, even though the audience knows it's difficult. If it's not performed well, we are looking into a mirror. We see ourselves reflected, struggling to find cohesion, to find connection, to make a spark out of nothing. We see people trying and failing to work together. Bad improv reminds me of the Tower of Babel. It makes me think of hubris. It makes me think of the film CLIMAX by French auteur Gaspar. CLIMAX is the product of 2 weeks of filming in the suburbs of Paris inside of an abandoned school. It tells the story of a group of dancers who have been chosen by a visionary choreographer to rehearse and collaborate on a piece together. After rehearsal comes a party where an alcoholic punch is served to the guests. As the party heats up, it becomes evident that someone must have spiked the sangria with LSD. The party descends into madness as the characters cope with their distorted realities. While the film itself is a techno-horrific Final Destination roller coaster of color, sound, and camera angles, the story of the film is what makes me sick. See, CLIMAX is based on a true story, and it does not hold back on that concept. Let's figure out what exactly didn't work about this film's use of improv. Improvisation has been around as early as storytelling has been around. However, the conscious act of performing improvised theater didn't come around until 16th century Italy, when commedia dell'arte used character archetypes in improvised situations to entertain people in the streets. Improv became a formal tool in the actor's creative process thanks to theater practitioners like Konstantin Stanislavski and Jacques Copeau, when they both rejected the prominent theater at the time. Stanislavski aimed to shift the art form towards ensemble collaboration instead of elitism and the hierarchical structure of popular theater. Copeau complained that theater during the neoclassical era was too commercial and void of substance and human experience, instead aiming for ornamentation and lowbrow entertainment.
Mole really pumps my nads.
Moliere.
I love his work.
Improvisation is inherently collaborative, and relying on human intuition and spontaneous wit is a much more artistically fulfilling source of entertainment than the ham acting Copeau was sickened by in his day. Once it became part of the actor's process, theater games emerged in the 20th century as part of progressive education initiatives, and eventually improv itself formed lots of different exercises and games, which in turn became their whole own performance style from the 1950s onward, thanks largely to the Second City and similar improv theaters. Human intuition and spontaneous wit. When those things work in tandem, improvisation is almost transcendent. When either of the two is weak, however, the entire process feels just as hammy as the acting Copeau despised. Through my own experience failing to apply my improvisational skills to formalized improv show structures, and probably more so my many times as an improv audience member, I have devised my own list of criteria for what makes an improvisational performance worth watching. My criteria are as follows. There must be a comprehensible narrative. There must be diverse characters with a multitude of points of view. There must be variety in both dialogue and action. There must be a strong sense of core, which means character, objective, relationship, and environment. Also, does it feel like we're all working on the same assignment? And does the piece come to a satisfying conclusion? I would like to evaluate Gaspar Noé's CLIMAX through these criteria and see what kinds of conclusions I can draw from it. I will also take a look at another auteur of the improvised film canon, Christopher Guest, and his directorial debut, Waiting for Guffman, which happens to be my favorite movie, and find why it hits the mark so well while CLIMAX falls flat.
Perfect, good boy.
Waiting for Guffman is a fully improvised comedic mockumentary directed by and starring Christopher Guest. He plays Corky St. Clair, an off Broadway director who returns to the small town of Blaine, Missouri, to direct their 150th anniversary play. The film covers the entirety of the production's process from conception to final performance. Corky casts the production with local talent. Their talents are limited, but their passion for the project couldn't be higher. That is, until Corky tells them that he has pulled some of his strings and Broadway producer Mort Guffman has agreed to come to the performance to option the show for Broadway. It is my favorite movie, and I discover something new to laugh at each time I watch it. The film is fully improvised, save for the actual musical performances of Red, White, and Blaine in the third act. It might not seem like the most apt comparison to put against CLIMAX. It has a different tone, it's got a different structure, it's a completely different genre. I assure you, though, these films have enough in common for me to do this. Let's look deeper into why Guffman works as well as it does. Being a mockumentary-style film, Guffman is structured in a way that presents the story as answers to a series of questions. It shows events as they happen, with interstitial interview segments throughout.
I was shopping for my wife, Bonnie. I buy most of her clothes.
We don't hear the questions being asked. They are innate in how information is revealed to the audience. There is a clear cause and effect to each story beat, and as the film progresses, we are able to piece together a rich and complex narrative built by the improvisational world building each person does to make the story whole.
Is that we can't have the porta potties too far off the main route.
The film opens with the city council members conceptualizing and working out the specifics of the town's 150th anniversary festival, giving an idea of the general hype and excitement around the celebration. We learn about the history of Blaine Fabin and his mythic presence in the town, and meet one of his descendants, who, in her small-scale fame,
I can certainly understand how the Kennedys feel.
Once we understand the town and some of the basic history behind it, we meet the director of the play depicting the town's history, Corky St. Clair. He is eccentric and has a genuine thirst for artistic achievement. His reputation for putting on very theatrical productions in the past has garnered lots of excitement in the community for his work. While those more experienced in theater-going might consider Corky's past productions to be dangerous or overwrought, the general consensus is that the town appreciates Corky's work. Once Corky and his reputation are established, we see the auditions and meet the cast.
I'm going to do a scene from the movie Raging Bull. You fucked my wife? What? How can you ask me a question like that? How can you ask me?
The motley crew of performers include old standbys Ron and Sheila Albertson, the travel agents who have never left their home state, Dr. Alan Pearl, a dentist and newcomer to the theater, Libby Mae Brown, an employee at the local Dairy Queen who dreams of more, Johnny Savage, the aloof, masculine, handsome mechanic, and retired taxidermist and longtime Blaneian Clifford Woolley. Each has a unique perspective and level of experience, and much of the comedy in the late first act comes from watching these different perspectives interact with one another.
I feel you're blowing in my ear.
Okay, all right, but you see, you jumped to a conclusion. See, what I'm asking for is, your first feeling was not that I was blowing on you. It was more like Virgin Isles or Bahamian.
Perhaps the most striking different perspective comes from Bob Balaban's character, Lloyd Miller, the music director of the production. While Corky and his ensemble are all clearly optimistic and ecstatic to be working on the show, Lloyd is a tightly wound and underappreciated musician who has been dethroned as the director of these productions to make room for the visionary New York talent of Corky St. Clair. He shows a lot of contempt bubbling just beneath the surface for Corky's process, and a lot of the decisions made in the trenches of the early rehearsal process. This tension is paid off in the third act when Lloyd takes the conductor's stand and demonstrates mastery in leading a beautiful orchestra pit for the otherwise lackluster and cringe-inducing final performance. As the nitty-gritty of rehearsals continues on, we see moments of cast bonding outside of rehearsal. This gives us time to breathe with the characters and learn more of what makes them tick as people.
Why don't you get one of those vagina enlargements?
There, can we have some coffee over here?
As if the cast needed more motivation to work their hardest for him, Corky delivers the news that he has received a bite from a producing organization, and Mort Guffman will come to view the production as an option for further consideration.
Wow. What does this mean, Corky?
What it means is we may be going to Broadway.
Corky asks the city council for more money. With this, we learn how Corky reacts to receiving news that he does not
You're
like.
bastard people.
His outbursts
That's what
of
you
rage
You're
are
just
comedic
bastard
highlights
people,
of
and
the
I'm going
film,
home and I'm
showcasing
gonna-
just how wrapped
I'm gonna
up in
bite
his
my
vision he
pillow
is.
what I'm gonna do.
There is a lot on the line for him with this production, and Corky doesn't want to sacrifice his art to fit a budget that won't get him to Broadway. He leaves the production, and the cast is completely destroyed by the news that the show is seemingly over before it even started. They tried to get him to come back, but it takes an all-hands-on-deck effort by the city council to convince him.
The show is what we need, and it ain't gonna happen with Lloyd. Lloyd is a music teacher, and he shops at Walmart. He doesn't even...
Upon Corky's return, we see the show coming together. The cast knows the material, the sets are nearing completion, the choreography is coming together, and the specifics of costuming are discussed. When it seems like everything is going smoothly leading into tech and opening night, Corky receives the news that Johnny Savage will no longer be part of the show. In one of his classic fits of rage, Corky cuts ties with Johnny and quickly decides to take on his role. Squeezing himself into pants that don't fit and characters he would never convincingly play, Corky becomes one of the cast, putting not only his abilities as a director, but also as an actor on the line for professional scrutiny by someone who could potentially decide his future.
I hate you, and I hate your ass face.
The third act of the movie shows the opening night performance of Red, White, and Blaine and the full product we have seen snippets of for most of the runtime. This performance is a culmination of elements from every scene leading up to it, and the hilarity comes with recognition of these elements through the lens of a final performance. We hear glowing reviews from beloved audience members like Steve Stark and Linda Pearl.
Who knew that he was gonna act and sing and dance? You know, he can just do everything there is to do, and there's only one other person in the world that can do that, and that's Barbra Streisand.
Approval from key members of City Council, and suspiciously no sign of Guffman, at least for a while. A man occupies the reserved seat partway through the performance, reinvigorating the cast with adrenaline, knowing that this could very well be their career-defining performance. Corky practically shoves aside every bit of praise he gets from the people within the community of Blaine in order to butter up Mr. Guffman. The gentleman is kind and soft-spoken to the point where he has to come clean that he is no one special, he just arrived late to the show. He offers his sincere praise as he breaks the news to everyone, and the camera lingers on the completely distraught and deflated cast members in a genuinely heartbreaking climactic scene. It is harrowing to watch the hopes and dreams of a team of amateurs be destroyed in real time. The film ends sometime after the events of the production, showing glimpses into how the characters change after Red, White, and Blaine. Many have moved away from Blaine either to pursue entertainment as a career or just because the town had nothing else to offer them. Ron and Sheila are background actors for commercials in Los Angeles, Dr. Pearl is an entertainer in a nursing home in Miami, and most heartbreaking of them all is Libby Mae Brown, who always has and always will have a place at the Dairy Queen. Her dream of moving to New York is squashed when her father gets out of prison. She instead moves to Alabama with him, presumably to help him get his life started back up. The film closes with a rambling and utterly lost Corky, who has returned to New York to open a Hollywood novelties shop. He is caught up in making the best of his endeavor, not totally disillusioned with his place in the world of performing arts, but definitely changed. Guffman is structured in a very smart way that keeps the improvisational spirit feeling fresh all the way through to the end, by keeping the series of questions going all the way through. The constant cause and effect gives us a comprehensible narrative that passes all of my requirements for good improvisation with flying colors.
Artford, not live in this, L.O.
Christopher Guest is known for holding his ensembles to a high standard of quality. He wants to have fun while creating an earnest story. Comedy is reality plus one step further is his mantra, always keeping things grounded within what could happen in real life, maybe just one step beyond it, though. This is why Corky's ramblings and rants and outbursts are so memorable.
Get off tonight? What
He is
time
a
do you get off
portrait
tonight?
of a man we know, with just a few hints of caricature here and there to keep us on our toes. It's a brand of humor that has informed much of Catherine O'Hara's entire career, leading up to her magnum opus as Moira Rose in Schitt's Creek.
Oh, I just finally cried myself to sleep.
Dr. Pearl's lazy eye, Ron Albertson's constant one-liners to keep up the spirit, Lloyd Miller's Herculean sense of patience, these are all unique and interesting characters that all feel like they're working towards the same goal, albeit for their own reasons. This is due in part to the expertise of the cast, but also thanks to Guest's pre-planning of a story outline, making sure certain beats and events came along in the story. The improv informs most of the story, however, but through taking the burden off the actors to fully improvise the entire story gives them the freedom to use that improv to find the narrative organically, with lots of humor coming from that exploration. Guest also does a ton of heavy lifting in that he edits together a narrative, pulling from hundreds of hours of filmed improvisation. He spent 9 months editing Guffman, which is remarkable considering he's cutting hundreds of hours down to 90 minutes. Giving the actors a structure in which to work liberates them from having to take on the role of screenwriter. They have an actual foundation to build upon. They aren't creating something out of nothing. The film gives this feeling that everyone involved is working at their absolute peak, and it shows in the effortless humor and humanity of each character. They feel real. The story of Guffman is so much more than the events surrounding Red, White, and Blaine because the characters are played with love and empathy, each part of an ensemble of misfits yearning to be remarkable in their mundane lives. While Guffman sings with competence and clarity in its narrative, CLIMAX feels like it was thrown together haphazardly, with the narrative being a glaring afterthought behind the visionary concept. It is segmented into 3 sections: the interviews, the rehearsal, and the after-party. We get a tease of the end of the film at the beginning. We see the protagonist of the film crawling through the snow. We then switch into a series of confessionals featuring each and every one of the dancers we will see throughout the rest of the film. Different sentiments are shared, but there isn't enough distinction between them to make any of them stand out. Their names are shown, but with 21 dancers, it is difficult to keep track of more than a couple of them. Luckily, the film seems to suggest that names aren't going to be an integral part of the viewing experience. It's also unclear whether these confessionals are planting something important or not, since they all feel pretty one-note. All the characters have relatively similar attitudes, ways of speaking about their art, and all being Parisian dancers have similar socioeconomic status. None are obviously affluent, but none are complete starving artists. They're representative of Paris culturally, but with little variance in expressed interest. Once we move on from the confessionals, the film switches to storytelling primarily with visuals. The camera work attempts to capture the single-take aesthetic as it zooms over and around the dancers. Different soloists take the focus while synchronized movements happen around them. 1 or 2 of the confessionals hint that the choreographer for this piece has promised fame and fortune could come of this. So if the viewer remembers these details, it becomes clear that there is an element of competition at play during the actual rehearsal. What's not clear, however, is this an audition? Are people going to be selected from this group? Keeping track of who is nearly impossible. Everyone is here to circle jerk about making art, to have sex, to party, to make it in the industry, to shrug and say, that's life. We see more of a select group of characters, so it seems clear that they are the ones we need to keep track of, but the film does little to acknowledge importance anywhere other than in the moment-by-moment choreography. The performances in this film feel very naturalistic, but not in the same way as Guffman. There, the naturalism comes from having a structure that incentivizes actors' embellishments upon a predetermined track. The naturalism in the performances here in Climax come from Noé's fuck around and find out style of filmmaking. He gave very little direction to these dancers, and I say dancers deliberately. None of them are trained actors, which isn't necessarily a bit dig on them, but I'll get into what I mean later. And let them pretty much just hit their own story beats as they went. As difficult as it is to classify something as high energy, eclectic, and choreographed as this film is as mumblecore, it does have a directionless, cynical energy to it that feels like it just shrugs every shitty decision, foul remark, ugly reveal, and tasteless action off as, that's life. Noé compares the story he constructed to the Old Testament's Tower of Babel. It is a story of hubris, as humans believe they can build a tower to reach heaven. God punishes them by making everyone speak different languages so they can no longer communicate with one another, and chaos ensues. And sure, that metaphor checks out for the most part. But it's not through their hubris that they fall victim, it's because of the wrongful action of one person. It's nothing to do with hubris, it's all to do with the shitty individual actions of individual people that make this story descend into madness. What's the stand-in for God here? Is it the drug? Is it Daddy, the DJ for the event, who seems to be a sense of comfort to several characters? Is the point that there is no stand-in for God? But in that case, what is the point? I think we all know what the point is. The point is that Gaspar Noé was horny to show off a bunch of dancers on film using some cool camera tricks he envisioned. Going along with his usual aesthetic, he wanted to show the ugliness of the human spirit. In the film, there is little, if any, kindness between characters. Everyone always chooses the least human way of dealing with the situation. The only narrative direction Noé gave the cast was that only the strong will survive. This is an extremely vague direction that even experienced improvisers would have trouble illustrating. The film is most competent when no one is speaking, when it is just choreographed dance. The initial rehearsal is my favorite part of the film because the spontaneity feels earned. It is within a structure that frees the performers to make choices instead of giving them the responsibility of creating the entire narrative. These people are professional dancers playing more or less extensions of themselves through playing out what shocking events they think would be interesting or cool to be in a movie. The director encouraged certain topics and always ensured there was a mutual sense of comfort when discussing what plot elements the dancers wanted to introduce to their storylines, but this fuck around and find out approach gives the film a feeling that they had to carve a narrative out of a few weeks of directionless thought experiments by a bunch of French dancers cosplaying misery and #cinema. You might be thinking, but how did the actors have so much freedom to make all these choices? They're adapting a true story. Of course there would be certain things they had to try to reach during their improvisation. Nope. Nothing in the film actually happened. A pregnant woman wasn't kicked in the stomach. No one caught fire. No one had sex with their brother. There was no non-consensual sex, or any sex at all for that matter. No stabbing, no encouraging suicide, just a group of dancers who realized they were drugged. It may have been a little tense, but in reality they all just kind of vibed and waited it out. Learning that this is a purely speculative adaptation of true events immediately cheapens everything that happened in the film past the initial rehearsal. Repeat viewings do reveal that there is some competence in the through line within some character arcs, but no matter how many times you watch it, these narratives don't tell me anything interesting about what happens. It just happens. Everything just happens, and there's no reflection, no real consequence, just loudness, headache-inducing light, and awful action after awful action. Since I can't recall names, once characters' narratives suddenly become searching for each other, I'm not really keen on what anyone needs. It's truly just unpleasantness for the sake of being unpleasant. As I slog through this film for the third time to write this script, I feel so disappointed in it. I feel like I have been robbed of a rich narrative. Instead of a compelling, emotionally investing story with a clear set of problems and solutions, or failures told from varying perspectives with real, actual human problems and stakes, the audience gets a patchwork of human suffering and Paris's burning dance sequences with brutality and taboo of all sorts peppered in just for fun. It definitely has its place in a certain corner of art house cinema, but it's not for me. I prefer improvisational performances where performers are encouraged to embellish and create whole existing lives for their character outside of the direct events of the narrative. That isn't to say I want this movie to be more like Waiting for Guffman. They are fundamentally different in other ways, like the length of the timeline, the tone, the visual language they use. The improvisations in CLIMAX, as natural as they seem, are constrained by the burden of having to tell Noé's story for him. The director plays a guessing game with his performers, never knowing what the hell they filmed is eventually going to become. Every day they went to work not knowing what was coming next, and none of the actors really had a sense of their arc until viewing the film in post-production. I find a similarity between an interview with Sofia Boutella, the only actual actor in the film, and a quote from Libby Mae Brown in discussing their directors.
The rehearsal and the building process of like the scene would be, depend on the character and where he wanted to go and where he wanted to shoot. But every day we had no idea what we were going to do tomorrow.
Well, the exercises all mean something, even if you don't know what. Dr. Pearl, he'll come around and he'll learn, like Ron and Sheila and I have learned, that Corky has a vision.
This isn't being an auteur, it's playing the guessing game. I've heard that Gaspar is perfectly kind on set. He's a compassionate guy. He promotes and requires consent between actors when they discuss ideas of what they want to film, and that's all fine and dandy, but that doesn't change my opinion of his movie. Directors get more humanity out of their actors when they meet their actors in the middle, especially when they're not trained actors. Give them an angle, be a coach to them, make sure that they're all aware of what they are creating. If there's shock in your art, hopefully there's a point to it. Even if the point is to have no point, at least make it a cohesive pointlessness. When you have over 20 non-actors making a movie where the intent is to provoke discomfort, the discomfort is only dulled when you realize it's just a room full of people trying to one-up one another's depictions of human suffering. If I wanted to see that, I'd just go to a college improv show.
Once I thought I was so fine, I bragged almost all the time. The people in my town, they all bragged too. Our city, it was called Shinar. We thought that we would go so far. We knew that we were much better than you. To show our greatness and our power, we tried to build an awesome tower. We thought that we could be like God, you see. We gave up all good things in life, our husbands, children, and our wives. But God stopped our little building spree. Ich kann Bibel sprechen Block. Can you understand my talk? Esma sugar zoinger foo. Do you hear my words to you? Dreka korvu pelembo. Where did my nice language go? Elevator gorgies, our towers turned into a mess.
Everybody dance.